This was absolutely one of the dumbest ideas I've had in a long time. And it all started when I read this comment, and then I thought to myself, that would actually be a lot of fun. And then it wasn't. If I had any idea the amount of time and pain this was going to cause me, I would have done literally anything else. But here we are, so enjoy my pain. To begin, I chose the highest difficulty setting I had, difficulty 4, because I'm not really good at the game, but that doesn't matter. After many restarts, I decided that Dwarf and Anvil was going to get us to where we're going. Now dwarves, being historically accurate, destroy beer and wine in exchange for money, but in this case they will also destroy geodes. The only problem was, we hadn't actually found any dwarves yet, but we did manage to make a first rent payment with 1 gold to spare. And we did get a golem, which is great because that will spit out geodes for 5 straight turns. And luckily I had 2 miners that could take advantage of that for now, but not the kind of miners that streamers like. And at this point we got our first sapphires, so it was really looking good to be a mining run. We then popped the lucky capsule, which means one of our next symbols would be a rare. And what a perfect rare it was. This was exactly where the light bulb in my head went off and things got progressively stupider and stupider. So whenever something adds value to our purple angel, it gains permanent +1 value. Then we fed our miners their rocks and out popped even more helpful symbols. And then it was time for a rent payment and we were 1 YouTuber IQ over the amount we needed. And our choice of items was unfortunate, so we went with a French head removal device. We already had 1 item too many, so we removed a monkey because it's cruel to keep animals captive. Our miners then shared a rock together, and that's really great because that adds a lot of value. And then we found another ore right away that I hoped they would put in their mouths together. At this point I realized how many gems I had and deduced that it was a geologist I needed to help multiply their value. By this point I was getting pretty sad that I didn't have a dwarf to feed my wine to, but the wine was increasing in value, so at least that helped. And then we took another lucky capsule so we could have another rare right away. And that turned out to be a farmer, which is unfortunate unless you're a fruit. So I just took the voidstone instead, just because I like the sound they make. And we were managing to make pretty good money. By the time the rent payment came around, we had 343 out of the 225 we needed. Because I gambled my way to another rent payment, it was time to pick another item. Maxwell the Bear is kind of funny, but we went with triple coins, just because it would be marginally useful. At this point, I considered taking the comedian because it could multiply certain symbols by 3 times, but I figured this video was already going to be funny enough. And then your dad showed up and we were finally in business. This meant we could get rid of both of the miners because he was basically an upgraded version. By the time our rent payment came due, we only had 328 out of the 300 we needed, so our brilliant plan was slipping away. And then I took a lunchbox because I was desperate for anything that could help. And that gave us a beer, which we immediately fed to the dwarf, followed by an entire bottle of wine because why not? It's Wednesday. At this point, we finally found what we needed to start our adventures in multiplication, a light bulb that doubles the value of gems. Just look at that thing go. And that was a big sign of things to come. It even started to touch my amethyst, which felt really good. Then we gave the dwarf more wine, and for the next rent payment we only had 388 out of the 375, so we were actually getting worse. Then we found something that could boost our mining run, a literal mine. This will add a geode every single turn for the dwarf to eat. And just like me, it expires after 4 turns and leaves you with a pickaxe. A few turns later we found another golem. That's going to give even more geodes for the dwarf to eat and make us tons of money. Followed immediately by another golem, so we had the happiest dwarf you've ever seen. 1 buffing capsule and 1 happy dwarf later, we had the biggest spin to date. But don't worry, we're still going to add an unhealthy amount of digits to those numbers. But before we do that, we're going to be saved by a swear jar because we can't even accomplish a simple rent payment. Next, we found a diver, which is the underwater version of what we needed, which was cool, but since we didn't actually need it, we settled for a golem. And I struggled for a while, choosing between this blue key, which can open chests, or another dwarf, which could destroy rocks. And I settled for the dwarf because the more mouths I could put rocks in, the better off we're going to be. And they rewarded me immediately with 2 diamonds. This next maneuver, in hindsight, was incredibly stupid, which was exactly why I did it. A Midas bomb. Destroys everything around it and gives 7 times their value. To be honest, I just had too many symbols and this was an easy way to get rid of them. So then we let the bomb take over and what luck we had. It did assassinate one of my dwarves, but we did have 100% more than we needed. In all, that caused me to get 464 gold from a single spin. This really gave me the freeboard I needed to take some chances since I already had the 600 gold I needed in 5 spins. And despite our massive explosion, our very precious amethyst survived as well as both of our diamonds. We only had 1 dwarf left, but luckily he was very hungry because look at him go. You can't can't put enough rocks in his mouth. Normally you have to pay for this sort of thing. And thanks to just that, we got 258. So we had double the amount we needed for our rent payment, but we were starting to accumulate a lot of garbage symbols. So we need something whose mouth those could go into. Our next rent payment came due, we easily had the money, and we instantly had enough for the next rent payment as well. The very next spin, we found exactly what we were looking for in a geologist. They were about to put so many hard things in their mouth that it was going to make even your mom jealous. Basically, they destroy low quality gems while keeping high quality gems intact, and every time they eat something, they themselves get more value. To keep stacking on our impossible luck, we found a cleaning rig which makes all of the gems worth one more. Next, we removed a flower because if it's not a gem, it doesn't deserve a spot in my life. But look at that geologist go, cleaning up our mess. And at the rate he continued at, he was clearly going to carry us as far as we wanted to go. Even when things respawned, he'd eat those too. As our geologist continued his mineral mukbang, we got our first multiplying arrow. So that's going to spin every turn. Whatever it points to gets double value. By this point, the geologist had eaten most of our reels, but he was up to 23 value, so you can understand how a multiplier plus a geologist can lead to fun things. Our next payment required 625, we had 1319, and like any good overachiever, we also had the next run payment already. As a reward for being extremely lucky, we got another item that would increase the value of geodes and shiny pebbles. Furthering our incredible luck was a very rare golden arrow, whatever that points to had 4 times value. So if both of our arrows pointed to the same thing, we would get an 8 times multiplier. We just needed some actual symbols to point at. The geologist ate even more of our symbols, but we did get a 2 times multiplier from him. We had well over double the amount we needed for our next rent payment, and again we had enough for the following rent payment after that. I was starting to get desperate for symbols, so we went with the magic key in case we happened to get a chest show up for 3 times the value. It took a while, but we finally added another gem, a ruby. It gives 3 by itself, and if there's other rubies, even more value. On top of that, we got some really good multipliers going for a 200 gold spin. And we were starting to get more and more spins with multipliers, which meant some really big value already, so we were really starting to see the potential. And despite the fact we had 50% empty reels, we had well over double the amount we needed. And if I was smart, I would have stopped myself here and called it a victory. Unfortunately, I decided to chase stupider and stupider ideas for a while. Basically, I assumed we could make really big multipliers, and the more times we multiplied the amethyst, the higher the value it got and the bigger multipliers we could make. Even a few small multipliers on a simple diamond earned 56. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this wild card was actually going to be hugely valuable for me. It simply replicated the highest value symbol around it, and it itself could have its own multiplier pointing to it. For example, on this spin, it's going to mimic the geologist beside it, but also get a 4 times multiplier from the arrow below it, giving us $176. So imagine if we had just a few more arrows. Rent became due, we needed 1,000, we had 2,700. In fact, we have enough for the next rent payment as well. And then came a silver arrow, so that's a 3 times multiplier to whatever it points to. We got a double multiplier on our idiot, so that gave him 270. And keep in mind how much we're earning with half of our reels empty. Maintaining our course, we still have over double what we needed for our rent payment. Many exciting spins later, and we finally found a huge catalyst for our success, the Dame. She simply doubles the values of gems she touches. And now, on watching this back, I am so annoyed it took so long to find a simple Dame. They're normally fairly common, but we found everything else first. Also another money pointer, and immediately after that, another amethyst. Every time it's multiplied, it goes up permanently in value. And given the amount of multipliers happening, I think this was the point of no return. There was no stopping it now, the potential was too big. Especially after another silver arrow. Next, our greedy landlords wanted 3,000, we had 4,000 already, so that was easy. I then decided to try some Robin Hood because he would add value to my arrows themselves. To be fair, we did have so many multipliers that it probably wasn't gonna matter, but it did add some value. Like on this turn, the silver arrow was worth 3 times 3, which then transferred to the wild card, which itself was multiplied by another 3. I realized at this point after all these hours, this run was truly just built on pure dumb luck. We were just hoping for big multipliers to land to carry us through for now. And like any good gambler, I just wanted more. Checking in on the next rent payment, we needed 3,500, we had 5,000. And then we were slapped in the face with another silver arrow, plus a cardboard box, which allowed us to remove 1 symbol every 10 spins. Spoiler alert, we had a lot of removals by the time I was done. I then started trimming some fat. If it wasn't a high value symbol or a multiplier, it was on its way out. The next rent payment was due, we were 50% above it. And what we wanted above all else were dames and arrows. We did take a mine because it had been a while since we put anything in anyone's mouth. And we rolled these symbols for so long that the game had to start making up numbers just to accommodate us. And since our reels were getting full, we sent Robin Hood back to be a peasant in the forest. Our next big find was a very rare credit card. Every 7 spins, you have 17 more symbols to choose from. I can't even count that high, but obviously that's going to help us find each and every symbol we want. I did select a very rare pirate next, mostly because I was getting tired of watching the same things roll again and again. A million spins later, we finally got another dame, which greatly increased my multipliers. And wouldn't you know it, a few spins later we got our third dame, so the multipliers were absolutely gonna get stupid. Our next spin was nothing special, but it wound up at 1624, which is actually just a very average roll at this point. Many spins later, thanks to our extra picks, we found our fourth dame. And that means our amethysts are gonna grow every single turn, and they're already up to a value of 120, so this spin was 3500. And the dopamine keeps flowing in with yet another dame. And with so many things touching so many things, the multipliers are getting outrageous, and we've still got hours more to go. But this simple spin ended up being in the neighborhood of 12,000. I also brilliantly learned at this point that I could re-roll the whole strip. And another silver arrow. And thanks to a silver arrow plus a few multipliers, we had a record-setting spin up to this point of 20,000. And then we find yet another dame, and we've actually quietly accumulated $400,000. Which is a lot of rent money, unless you live in Vancouver. Along the way, we added a rusty gear, so that means if 3 of the same symbols are touching each other, they get double value. And fittingly, we added a third amethyst plus another dame, and we removed some symbols that aren't that good. By this point, I was fully committed and completely obsessed to making a really big number happen. It was also at this point that I realized I could increase the speed of the spin, so that would have saved me countless hours already. But hey, it's time I'll never get back anyway. This was officially the first spin to break 100,000, followed shortly by a spin of over 2 million that I almost missed. And given that our rent payments are only 19,000, you're probably asking, why keep going? I don't know either. This oil can lets us respin one column every 5 spins. The column that does get a respin gets a 2 times multiplier as well. And since I've completely lost track of all the things that can multiply, I decided to add another wild card just to increase our chances of a multiplication. By this point, it had been many hours and my brain was getting very tired. It does not work well at the best of times, but I decided that I could use my rusty gear and add more amethysts that way to get more potential multiplication. Luckily, I had the opportunity to try pretty much whatever I want because I have too much time on my hands, clearly. So here's a spin with 6 amethysts total. Some of them don't have a hugely high value, but they're groups of 3 so they do multiply each other. Only 32,000. By now, one of our amethysts had climbed over 1,000 base value, so we clearly already been spinning a lot. But that means the more we spin, the more value we get. There's a spin for 2.6 million. Then we find a very rare and potentially very useful item. It turns all cats into wild cards, and cats are common. So we very promptly added a cat, because I thought to myself, why bother thinking? By this point, I can't actually understand what I'm saying or thinking, but we have earned about $43 million. By the time I found the telescope, I was almost in shock. I assumed there was no more items left for me to find. Every 3 spins, all symbols are considered adjacent. To translate that into plain English, every third spin really big. For example, this fairly average roll worth $6 million. This is where I made the surprisingly intelligent decision to remove some of the lower value amethysts for more dames because every third spin they're all going to multiply. Sometime later I started finding them, and that meant I could do something that felt strange and removing an amethyst worth 605 base value. And then I just kept on spinning. Here was one for a modest 9 million. But you know what, that's not good enough, so here's one for 18 million. At this point, it looks like I started trying to do some math and realizing that I could actually take away a lot of the amethysts and replace them with dames because every third roll, they're guaranteed adjacent anyway. I almost missed that spin for 34 million because I'm getting tired, but they're getting progressively bigger. But for me, that just leads to the question, how big can they get? And then we got a further sign of things to come with 2 gold arrows pointing at the right things for 57 million. I speculated for a minute on whether the rare protractor could be of help, and then I realized it doesn't matter, it's free, so I took it. A few spins later, $90 million. And even after 40 years of this, we still found an item that could help us. Swapping device. You may swap the position of 2 symbols once per spin. That was followed almost immediately by this. Gives 1 reroll each spin. That's incredibly powerful. And then we got a $300 million spin. But then our incredible luck still continued. We found the quiver, which means all of our beloved arrows point in 2 directions. And we were already making way too much money before these items. Our first spin with these new helpful nuggets yielded us $100 million, and that was a very average roll. And it really seemed like our luck was unstoppable at this point because we found the lucky carrot. We're 3 times more likely to find rare stuff. So then it was a whole lot of spinning and waiting and looking for the big one. This one wound up being pretty big at 350 million. I'm starting to think at this point that the reason we're getting all these very rares is because we're literally running out of symbols. Frozen pizza, you add an extra symbol after every 2 spins. And this whole time, I've been purging amethysts and adding dames, and it was time to remove one of the final 2 amethysts for maximum roll potential. So then we finally got to unleash our army of dames. The arrows did not point as well as they could have, but regardless of that, because of all the dames, we made $950 million. But we weren't done yet. We still had silver arrows. We needed to turn those into gold, and that was gonna take a while. Because despite of all my incredible luck, I hadn't seen a golden arrow since the day my grandmother was born. To put that into perspective, I've just re-rolled this entire strip of symbols 20 times. I did not find one single golden arrow, so this was going to be a painful process. But to help cheer things up, here's a $3 billion spin, so we were headed in the right direction still. Next out of our magic hat came a golden carrot, which gave us a 5 times higher chance to find those very rare things. Watching this back, it all seemed like it happened very quickly. I'm really sad you guys didn't get to share the pain with me. But our added luck meant we found a golden arrow just a few spins later, so maybe this wasn't going to take so long after all. And not too heartbreakingly long after that, we found yet another golden arrow, so up goes the multiplier. Eventually, we wound up with 6 golden arrows, 2 wild cards, 1 very valuable amethyst, and 11 dames that doubled repeatedly. So the potential for a large roll was absolutely enormous. It was just a matter of spinning enough times to get there. The biggest potential was when the respin triggered on the same time as the telescope, because the respin would multiply times 3 and the telescope had everything adjacent. And those coinciding super spins happened about once every 5 minutes, so lucky me. This one caught my attention from the few gold arrows actually pointing to the amethyst for once, and this ended up stacking up to about 6.5 billion. Our money became so big that it actually sort of broke the numbers at the top of the screen, but our rent payments weren't a problem anymore, so we had the freedom to do whatever we wanted. And what we wanted was to start replacing the dames with golden arrows. Essentially replacing a guaranteed 2 times multiplier for a potential 4 times multiplier. At this point, I admit to myself that I don't know if this is going to be a good idea, but it gives us a higher potential. While I did have 64 rerolls of all of these symbols, this still took a long time. So many hours later, we've replaced most of the dames with golden arrows. This is a super roll, so this is where we get to start to see if this idea has any merit at this point, or if I just spend hours wasting my time. And as it turns out, I spent hours wasting my time because this landed on about 50 million. Okay, so maybe another try with even more golden arrows and therefore even more potential. And a brutally painful 80 million. Now this was the point where I've realized that turning the whole thing into golden arrows was a mistake and decided to go all the way back to dames again for a lot more spins. And like a slap in the face, as soon as I start to add more dames again, we get a massive roll of 14 billion. Fast forward another 44 years and we're suddenly left with nothing but dames and 1 amethyst because we're about to delete whatever that thing is. Now we'll simply have a 19 times doubler on a 4,000 value amethyst. So at the very least, we're going to be very consistent with our rolls. And as it turns out, it is a very consistent $2 billion per spin.